Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to make a start, just a couple of minutes delay. Welcome to this afternoon's Joint Select Committee meeting to consider the alternative service delivery model, proposed new model for tourism, leisure, culture and youth services. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our trade union representatives who've been asked to attend here today. They will speak under the public open forum aspect, which we will bring further up. So agenda item number 6, union consultation, we'll deal with that before we actually take the officer presentation. Okay, that's been agreed by select committee members as a good way forward. First item on the agenda, I'd like to elect a chair for today's meeting. So could I have some nominations, please? Councillor Webb?
Could I nominate Councillor Petruni, please, Chair?
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Pratt. We also need to appoint a vice chair for today. Could I take any nominations, please, for a vice? We shouldn't need it, but if we did. Nomination, please, for a vice chair. Councillor Dovey? Councillor Pavia. Seconder, please. Councillor Feakin. Okay, Councillor Petruni, if you'd like to come forward. I think we'll begin by making some introductions and introducing everybody for the purposes of new members, but also for the live streaming. Please be reminded that today's meeting is live streamed, so if you could turn off mobile phones or switch to silent, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Afternoon. Should we get the introductions underway with the officers first? Can you please introduce yourselves and your title, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Ian Saunders, Head of Tourism, Leisure, Culture and Youth.
Good afternoon. Marie Bartlett. I'm a Finance Manager.
Good afternoon. Tracy Thomas, Youth Service Manager.
Good afternoon. Richard Simpkins, Business Manager for Tourism, Leisure, Culture and Youth.
Thank you. And could the union officials state who they are and what union they're from, please?
Lorraine Gaskell, JMB Regional Organiser.
Peter Short from Unison.
Pete Strong from the NUT.
I think that's it. Okay. Do we want to do apologies for absence or apologies for absence? Anyone want to declare it?
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies this afternoon from County Councillors Tudor Thomas, Richard Roden, Jeremy Becker, Joanne Watkins, Martin Growcutt, Kevin Williams, Maureen Powell, and some co-optees, Mike Fowler, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? As and when? Okay. So we're moving item 6 first. So union consultation. I don't know how they want to order themselves, but if you could have your say on your views on this proposal. Thank you.
Sorry, can you just switch the button on the microphone and it should light up red? That's great, and when you've finished, if you can press again. Thank you.
Can I first of all start by thanking the Joint Select Committees for giving us this opportunity to address you about what we consider to be a very, very significant proposal with massive implications for the staff directly affected and for all employment within the Council. You'll not be surprised to learn that the trade union position on any form of outsourcing, however soft it may appear, has always been resisted. And there are a number of reasons why that is the case. And they are mainly based on some painful past experiences that we've had with the various types of outsourcing that you come across. And they've centred around the very considerable setup and transactional costs, what seems to be almost inevitable reductions in job stock and services, and general employment insecurity and deterioration in terms and conditions of employment and pay. And in respect of this particular proposal, our view would be that this is a means by which the Council will in effect outsource some of the horrendous impacts of austerity. They will be able to distance themselves from the impacts that government restraint on their funding are having on jobs and on the wider community. Distance is created by this arm's length arrangement that's being proposed. However, having said that in principle, looking at the proposals that are in front of you today in the final business case, we do want to make some comments about the alternative delivery model that's being advocated, that's being outlined there, to ensure, in our view, that some of the worst impacts of the outsourcing can be mitigated or eliminated. We'd recommend the following detailed points. You'll see at point 55 in the business case reference to the annual management fee. Now that says the annual management fee is not going to be inflation proofed, and we suspect there may be a move to put a taper into the management fee in the early years of the ADM. Now experience elsewhere suggests that expecting new organisations to generate the sort of income that will be required to make up for the impact of there being no inflation proofing or the taper that I've just referred to. That just simply does not happen. And of course, there are a number of services within this model, such as Countryside, by which I mean Countryside, not Caldecott Castle, and the youth service. Secondly, then, we believe that the council, as the papers advocate, should maintain the asset base, should maintain ownership of the asset base, and in our view, also maintain it and invest in it. In other words, lessening the potential burden on the ADM. We very much support the establishment of a TECO company, primarily, as the documents say, to avoid subsequent procurement and competitive tendering for services. We see reference within the document, again at page 52, to a support services agreement. We want that to be for the longest possible period. I think the business case says for a year to begin with and then renewable. Now, the destabilising effect this outsourcing could have on council central services is a significant concern of ours, and we think there should be a long-term, hopefully enduring support services agreement. We're also suggesting, and this is when it gets down to the real detail of our concerns, that a staffing agreement is drawn up between the council on the and the ADM to protect the interests of employees, both existing transferring employees and incoming employees. Now, in the staffing section within the business case, 4.6, pages 55 to 57, there's reference to the transfer of undertakings, protection of employees, and the preservation of membership of the local government scheme for transferring staff. That's obviously to be welcomed. Some of those points are in fact legal requirements or the subject of detailed Cabinet Office guidance. However, we would like to see a staffing agreement going a lot further than that and covering the following points. The ADM will be, and I'm sure will achieve, admissions to the local government pension scheme. We want that to be on an open basis so that incoming staff will also have the option of going into a good quality pension scheme. We think that's fundamentally important. We also think that the council should assist the ADM by meeting some of the historic pension liability so that the admittedly rather high pension contributions that the council currently has to pay are not transferred in their entirety to the ADM. So it's given the maximum possible opportunity to develop. Trade union recognition is mentioned in the business case. We expect that to apply to all staff, current and future staff, and also for our procedural agreements as they currently exist to be transferred and then appropriately amended to reflect the new arrangements. We would seek an enduring commitment to national and local agreements on a dynamic basis so that subsequent changes to those agreements will be adopted by the ADM, as opposed to what's happened in many cases where we've just simply gone straight into wage freezes, even though the agreements as they stood at the point of transfer are still respected. We'd also like to see the living wage transfer, and I'm sure that would be the council's intention, but we don't want that to continue to be paid by supplement. We want that actually to be on people's substantive rate of pay, so there is absolutely no question of that supplement being withdrawn in future years. As you'd expect, we would like admission to the redundancy modification order, which affects all council staff who move between councils and council-related bodies to apply to this transfer, and that would involve the ADM making application to be joined to the order so that people can stay part of that wider local government family and can carry their service and avoid redundancy costs when they move between employers within the public sector. We'd also obviously like to see a disputes resolution procedure put into that staffing agreement if disagreements arise between ourselves and our members and the ADM, there can be a proper disputes resolution procedure in place within which the council would mediate and arbitrate. Two final points then. The Code of Practice on Workforce Matters in Public Sector Service Contracts. This would have to apply to the transfer, and this is a particularly important piece of legislation which means that incoming staff would get the same terms and conditions of employment as transferring staff. We think that's fundamentally important for the morale and the stability of the company going forward, so that you don't get two tiers of employees developing, which is something that we used to see a lot of before this particular piece of legislation was applied to public sector service contracts within Wales. I hope I've effectively set out our stall in respect of the staffing arrangements that we would like to see. I do have one particular question, which is in relation to the trading company, and I'd like to hear what the intention was, if there is any, for the trading company to employ staff. Are they simply going to rely on the staff in the TECL company, or would they have the right to employ staff directly themselves? Again, that's a particular concern of ours in relation to this two-tier code. We wouldn't want that to be in any way circumvented by people suddenly being employed by the trading company at a later date. I'm now going to hand over to Lorraine and to Pete to make any supplementary comments that they'd like to make in addition to what I put forward. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Peter for going into the detail in terms of the conditions really that are worrying us more than anything else, which obviously primarily is around the terms and conditions and job security of our members. I've come to this quite late in the process, and I'm afraid, having looked through this, I fail to have been convinced that the alternative delivery model is maybe the panacea that it's being presented as potentially being. We're going to have the same people in the same roles providing the same services, and although there are obviously some tax implications, I think the GMB position at this point, until we could see more detail, because these changes would have some massive impacts on over 300 employees, and we're yet to see what exactly those impacts are going to be, because as yet that decision that hasn't been worked up, because that's a lot of work to do. But we're asking them people, the councillors in particular, to decide how their employees are going to be treated without the specifics actually in front of them. So I think serious consideration should be given to the transform in-house. I do think there's more work, although I know this has been going on a long time and it is a hefty document. I think there's got to be a lot more focus on the people and the impacts on those individuals.
Nothing more to add other than to fully support the points already been made.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Saunders, how would you like to do your presentation and then address them, or would you like to address the concerns first?
If we could do our presentation and then answer the questions.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, members. I'd just like to start by positioning the work that's been done by the officers. The officers here in front of you, they've been working on behalf of Monmouthshire County Council to deliver different options for where we're going with alternative delivery model or transform in-house, are clearly employed by Monmouthshire County Council. They are officers that have been in local government for many years, and possibly up to, with Matthew Lewis as well in Countryside and the officers in front of you, the best part of 80 years public servants, public service colleagues. So I'd just like to start with that it's not any of the options that we're putting before you are in the best interest of Monmouthshire County Council first and primarily first. We've looked to do this work over the past 24 to 36 months, and it's not been an easy road. I think the short presentation we do following my quick introduction will show you the amount of contact we've had with members, stakeholders, and with our valued workforce. What we are now faced with is a decision about the future financial conditions and the ability to provide these services in the best way possible over the future years. Monmouthshire County Council need to provide these services with the best conditions to have focus, confidence and freedom to thrive as the local authority explores solutions to these difficult and testing times. These services will still be delivered on behalf of Monmouthshire County Council. These services are the dominant providers of a whole range of community, culture, sports and leisure facilities. Increasingly, they are seeking to achieve wider objectives and prevention of ill health, social isolation, mental health issues, and focus on the well-being of their local community. The health and well-being role and the encouragement of physical activity are built around common objectives, requiring a fresh approach to their delivery and funding. These services have contributed greatly to the medium-term financial plan and have provided savings and efficiencies over the past 4 years and previous to that, I would say. The full business case demonstrates they can contribute to offer savings whilst also lessening the burden to MCC on maintenance and staffing costs. Under no circumstances is the work on the ADM suggesting that these services have been neglected and have had difficulty in quick and timely decisions inside MCC. This is about ensuring and making a case for a more commercial edge and the ability to move at greater speed to respond to market conditions. Officers have worked tirelessly to give a balanced view of the options and consult and engage with as many of the workforce stakeholders to share opinions and views to get MCC to this point. It has been a long and detailed process, and whilst MCC still has to ensure all financial information is available, we are now in a position to recommend a preferred option as indicated in the paper that will be scrutinised today and presented to Cabinet and ultimately full Council. Teams are extremely positive about the new ways of working, the opportunity to deliver in a combined way, introduce themes and expertise through income opportunities, whilst also ensuring quality, safe services and a trained and motivated workforce. I'd just like to put a caveat to when we speak today as a team, we're speaking as officers of MCC, and we doesn't mean an alternative delivery model team, it means MCC officers. So I'd just like to now go into what is a short presentation, and then we'll take questions, if that's okay, Chair. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to start with the first couple of slides and just take members through some pivotal milestones that has been part of this journey over the last 2.5 years. So to remind members, we started this initially back in October 2014, where approval was given for initial investment to commission Amion Consulting to undertake a comprehensive review of future options for our cultural services. The purpose of this review was to identify future delivery options with an overall objective of improving, sustaining and developing local services to enable them to become more resilient and self-sustaining. During the review, it became apparent that cultural services overlap many other services within the wider tourism, leisure and cultural department, so a wider view was taken independently to make sure that services were dealt with in a much wider basis, so under the same auspice of the review. In October 2015, Cabinet then approved the release of additional monies for the investor redesign to fund the supplementary work needed to mobilise the tourism, leisure, culture and youth services. Following on from that, in December, a tender was placed on the Sale to Wales site and the successful advisors appointed were Anthony Collins solicitors to support us to look at the options available for those services. In May 2016, Cabinet approved the Future Monmouthshire programme, a strategic programme of whole authority work to create the capacity and foresight to develop solutions to some of the county's biggest challenges. This proposal formed one of the strategic programmes and streamlines of Future Monmouthshire. In October 2016, Cabinet approved the continuation of supplementary work from the initial phase of our strategic outline case to draft outline business case for consideration in early 2017. In March 2017, we brought the draft outline business case to Council, and Council agreed for us to take forward two options, the transform in-house and look at an alternative delivery model, where we could actually do a deeper analysis of both and give comparisons for members to be able to make an informed decision in the autumn stages of 2017. As members will see, this process has certainly been a lengthy, rigorous one, and it's been very open to scrutiny to ensure transparency and openness with those with a vested interest. During this phase, we've encouraged feedback as part of our consultation. A total of 13 sessions have taken place with members over the last 18 months, and an additional 60 sessions with town and community councils, trade unions and staff. So you can see we haven't been sat in a room and undertaking this ourselves. We've made sure that every person with a vested interest and a stakeholder in these services going forward has had every opportunity at every stage to feed into the consultation.
Thank you, Tracy. This slide demonstrates the likely cost for the options that we chose at the outline business case. Now, there's a significant detailed piece of work that supports all of this information, as you can imagine, but it has been independently and rigorously tested. The very first column on the left demonstrates what would have happened if we don't do anything. I know that was certainly the option that members discontinued or decided not to go ahead with. So clearly it was not acceptable, but it was just a reminder of why we went with the other two. If we didn't do anything, the cost of delivering the services the next 5 years is just over £26 million. Clearly that's not an acceptable cost for us. I just wanted to read something to you, some extracts from a note prepared from Kevin Ford. He was the financial consultant recommended through Anthony Collins. He unfortunately couldn't be with us here today, sends his apologies, but he's given me a briefing note, so I'm just going to read out some extracts from it for you. The figures which support the financial plan are detailed and thorough. They represent a prudent analysis of the income expenditure across the services in the ADM. Predictable cost increases, so wages and inflation, have been taken into account, and the figures present a picture of a viable enterprise. I have worked with the teams in each of the ADM's current services over the past year or so to explore the commercial principles behind generating new income. identify potential sources of additional income, identify and quantify any investments needed, and to provide feedback and challenge on the ideas and pose questions. Together, we've refined the income generation ideas and accurately estimated costs associated with generating new income. We have urged prudence throughout this process, focusing on predictable sources of income which offer reasonable levels of certainty. We have also focused attention on commercial reality, that generating income through providing services brings direct costs with a target with a realistic surplus in most of the income streams of between 5 and 10%. The result is a set of income reductions which are robust and prudent. If anything, they err on the side of caution. Kevin believes Monmouth has a particular advantage over many other local authorities in the high footfall of tourists every year. Many of the services provided by TLC and youth are potentially very attractive to these visitors. If the ADM can be successful in reaching out to this market, there is no reason why it should not be able to exceed the projected levels of income. The income streams do not at present include any new funding from grants apart from those already applied for. And whilst it is risky to expect to secure any single grant from trusts, foundations and government, the risk can be mitigated by making applications to a different number of sources each year. But in terms of prudency, they have not been included in this business plan. And then he basically signs off to say he's provided independent scrutiny and feedback on the development of the business case for the ADM. He will provide further feedback and challenge as the ADM develops his own business plan over the next few weeks. He will also look to include scrutiny from other independent business experts, but he is confident that the ADM can deliver the figures in the spreadsheet. Thank you.
Okay, throughout the strategic outline case and all the different papers in front of you, there are reasons for change. There are considerable reasons. From the list there is a few of the highlights really about why or why not. It's probably a more interesting question. Reflecting both on the contemporary needs and the wants of citizens, being responsive to the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, and the reality of a mixed economy in which public sector cannot deliver better outcomes on its own. So we recognise the factors within the future generations, the partnership work, the collaboration, all of those things, the involvement, the long-term planning, have been really key to moving forward with our services to the public. We're looking at enabling a self-determining business that operates for social and environmental good. Well, this is about the shared vision and the long-term outcomes for our communities, and we'll also have the freedom to access additional funding for long-term sustainability, sustaining locally accessible services and impact on local community of the future. Again, it's one of the aims and the values of the council is about local services and local delivery. So I think that's really important to ensure that's at the front of our thoughts. The social economy, we talk long and hard about how many of our population are really gifted and talented individuals, and do we really harness that huge opportunities out there? And I think it's having that confidence and expectation of being able to control and invest in their loyalty and expertise. I think that's really important. We've got a really good workforce, but it's just what else is out there and how do we connect with those people? So the volunteering and the employment opportunities that this model gives to us. And surplus reinvested in the business. Well, clearly, at the moment, the maintenance budget and the reactive maintenance budget and the way that the council's budget is, these services are not as prioritised as maybe some of the other services. And I think we've talked about that in other sessions. Conversations about whether a facility should be decorated or whether a school roof should be repaired. Clearly, the school is going to be at the front of that queue. And safety of our children is paramount, obviously. But if there is a different model there and we can make some surplus, then that money could be reinvested and help the business to thrive. And recognising as well that that's a really important factor that these services need more sustainability and more income. I think the one thing that we've always said right from the start of this process is our intrinsically motivated staff and given that autonomy to deliver better outcomes. We know that our workforce have got some of the solutions to some of these problems, and it's given them the power and the motivation to make sure that they've got the freedom to go forward and deliver better services and more quality services. And the last one, it's clear to see that our budgets in Monmouthshire are not improving. In fact, the challenge in front of us is absolutely huge. So these services that clearly, whilst they're very important and public facing, when you've got social services, education, all the other priorities of the council, the long-term future, if we put all those things into consideration, clearly, we would be managing a decline, and that's the where we are, unless members decide that these services are a priority, and that's again for members to decide. We don't see any improvement in the reactive maintenance budget and keeping our buildings safe for public. And I think that would be a question over the coming months: is what would the services look like without a new way of operating? So I think I'll leave it there.
Sorry, can I just interrupt? My mic doesn't seem to be working. Is there any chance you could swap over? It's switched on, but it doesn't seem to be working or recording. Could you just transfer your mic? Sorry. On live streaming, no one can hear you, see. Just. Okay, thank you. Try again.
Is that better? Yeah. Yes, right. Okay, shall I start again? What we're proposing is not a single entity for the delivery of these functions, and I'll explain why. We've got, as you see on the screen there, a technical company, a trading arm, in fact there will probably be 2 trading arms, and a charity. And I'll explain what these are. If I just remind members, first of all, what a technical company is, and as I was saying, you raised this when you spoke as well for the trade unions. A technical company is a company that is owned by the council. It has no private participation in it at shareholder level, and it delivers at least 80% of its activities back to the council, back to its owner. The advantage of a technical company is that it can be set up like a company, it can operate like a company, but the council is able to award contracts to that company without going through a procurement process. And equally, the company is able to procure services buy services back from the council, again, without going through a procurement process, which is of an advantage, obviously, when you're looking at these sort of service areas. It's able to deliver 20% of its activity outside the council to private individuals, but only 20%. What we're recommending, though, also is that there is a charity, and I'll come and explain a little bit more about what the charity is. The charity is primarily around leisure services. And if you think of what I said about 80% of the services being delivered to the public, back to the council, who do leisure services provide for? They provide for individuals. So a leisure company can't be a tech company usually. We've also put in there a trading arm, and that's because you may very well want the services in the ADM to do some trading outside the council. So what we propose is a trading arm as well, which means that the council can take advantage through the ADM of those opportunities, which are not back to the council, but to other delivery opportunities as well. So proposing really those three arms, and there very well may be a trading company through the charity as well, because charities, as I'm sure you're aware, have got very limited ways in which they can trade. And so charities, if you see Oxfam and all the other charities that have high street shops, that's done through their trading company. So we'd recommend that as well. If I then move on to a slide which is a little bit more detailed, and again we can explore this more when you are asking questions. This is a little bit more about how it will work. So the charity, and the reason you would have a charity is because there are significant tax advantages for a charity. But a charity is very different from a TECL company because a charity sits outside the council. And whereas in years past it used to be the case that the council could in effect own the charity and direct the charity, those days have gone, and now the Charity Commission is very clear that charities have to exist to serve the charity. So what you would probably do, we would suggest, is have a grant agreement between the council and the charity then would deliver under the terms of the grant agreement for what the council wants it to do. There's some detail there in relation to how the various models are set up, in relation to boards and where the company actually operates, how the company operates, but I can come back to that, I think, with questions. But it's really important to distinguish between what the TECL company is and how that operates, and you procure directly from that, and how the charity operates, because that's a separate entity and that is delivering its charitable objectives. And it gets lots of tax advantages, which is why a charity is very often the sort of model that we see around leisure services, because leisure services obviously have lots of buildings that they need and they get relief on that. If we then go on to the next slide, these are some issues which it's perfectly normal to see are still in consideration at this stage. At this stage, as your officers said, they are operating for the council, they are looking at this from the council's point of view. As the matters develop, if of course members decide to go down this route, you have to develop some of these details. You have to look at actually what sort of arrangement you're going to have between the council and between the alternative delivery model. How are you going to commission from the council? What sort of governance arrangements are you going to have in place? Who's going to be on the board? All of those sort of things. What are you going to have in your grant agreements between the council and the charity? Because in a way, the SLA covers all sorts of things, and the grant agreement will cover what you expect that charity to deliver for the money that you're giving it. It's a commercial arrangement in that sense. But because it's a commercial arrangement, you have all sorts of performance indicators and checks and balances in there, very much as you will have in your procurement from the TECL company as well. So you have all that. What will you do if it fails, a contingency arrangement? Well, you're entering into this in the belief that it will succeed. And it's really important, if you enter this, you're entering into it, you've taken everything into consideration, you've looked at the risks. I have to say, and I'm not flattering your officers, but this is one of the most thorough business cases I have ever seen. I really think your officers have gone into this in a great amount of detail. They've looked at the right things. They've taken advice. But nobody could ever guarantee that something is going to succeed. If you could guarantee that, we'd all be millionaires. But I think you go into it on the basis that you've done the work that you need to do, and you are taking what is always a risk. But it is a calculated risk, and it's a risk that should succeed. But if it does fail, well, you have a number of options there. You can bring the services back in-house. You can decide that you want to deliver those services through you may want to go and find a different provider. You may decide, actually, it's not really broken. If we've identified what the faults are here, we can have another go. You don't have to decide that at this point. What I think you would rightly be concerned about is that is thought about, and I think it has been, and that you would know in sufficient time to be prepared for something. And I think that's a really important thing. And again, I think it's important that you ask your officers about that. It's not all sorted out yet, it wouldn't be, but it's something to be aware of. How will you know it's succeeding as well? Well, I've referred to the grant agreement and the SLA. Those will be your prime ways of knowing that it is working or not.
Because what you are moving from, if you go down this model, is moving from managing delivery as a council to managing the contract and the grant agreement that you've got. And that's a different skill set. So you need to be sure that you've got people who can manage, who look at that skill set, who understand managing contracts as well. Because in effect, that's what it is. It's a commercial arrangement. It's your company, but it's a commercial arrangement. So you need to make sure that's there. And also, what would those warning signs be? I think I've said to you before when I've been at these meetings that I'm on the board of a hospital trust, and we have certain worry measures. We have worry measures where if we get 2 or 3 that are going a bit red, we know that it's time to look at something. And they're not, it's not rocket science. It's things like sickness absence, those sort of things. So you need to know the person who is monitoring this contract has a grip on that. Dealing with complaints, who are people going to complain to? You should make sure that both the charity and the tech company has good, sound and robust complaint system, and that the council then understands what complaints are being made and that they are being dealt with effectively as well. Assets, that's something else as well. One of the things that you may very well want to consider is how do you safeguard your assets? Don't forget, of course, that if you are going down the way of having a charity and a tech company, the charity will need to have access to those assets. But what you may want to do is consider whether or not you have a lease or a license to the charity to look after those assets for you. But you maintain, in effect, the freehold of those assets, and they then come back to you when you want them to. And then the final thing, and it's always an issue at this point, is what is the impact going to be on the services that are staying in the council? And there are a number of different areas there. There are your central costs, the viability of your central cost. There are issues where actually you may need to have some sort of arrangement, and I think it's extremely wise in my experience for the company, the charity, to look at what it is going to buy from the council over the first year or so. It settles things down in that way. It's a very good practice to do that. But there is undoubtedly an impact, and that's something that, again, as you are developing this, you need to be taking account of. I think, Ian, that's me over.
Okay, so here are some of the frequently asked questions. We just thought we'd cite some of the ones that come up. I think most of them have been answered, or at least they're on the questions that I would imagine that might be asked today. But we just thought it'd be helpful to reference them against where you can find the answers inside the full business case.
Okay, thank you. I will move to Q&A. I can urge councillors to be precise and concise and be explicitly clear what your questions actually are. Okay, so first is Councillor Howarth.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Could I just start with a quick question before I get into a few more executive questions towards the team there? The unions made it very clear there of what they thought was the best direction here and what they would like to see. I know it may be difficult to answer the question now, but what their proposals are and what they'd like to see, is that deliverable within what we have here, or does it make it impossible to deliver it? That's my first one. Right, I'll give you time to think about that one. Of course you can.
Can you turn off your mic, Councillor? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. The business case is based on the assumption that the existing terms and conditions will continue. It is built in the pay award linked to the local authority for the next 5 years. So we're using the same rate and the same national insurance rates, same pension rates as we would use in the MTFP model. So we are assuming that as pensions will rise, they will rise in the ADM. And we've also linked that to the pay award. So when you look at your MTFP at the moment, we have a pay award every year of 1%. That's been built into the model as well. In terms of, we've not built any redundancy costs in for the future because we expect the baseline staff structure to grow. The whole idea of this particular business case is that we want to grow our services, enhance them. We realise that the staffing structure we have at the moment, we're really at our bare bones, and we are looking to actually increase staff rather than decrease it. In terms of what they're asking for, we're already paying the living wage. I hadn't actually even thought about what in terms of pay grades, about whether it be a supplement or not. But actually we've got the budget at the moment to pay people the living wage, so that continues into the ADM. There's no change in that. In terms of national and local agreements, I know we haven't considered that, but there was no conscious decision to move away from a national agreement in terms of pay awards and the like. We certainly would agree with the pension scheme. We've spoke at length to Torvine about that, and we certainly would want to continue it to be on an open basis and allow new employees to join. And obviously I've built that pension rate in at the higher pension rate, so there shouldn't be any problem with that whatsoever. Trade union recognition, that's already included in the business case. We fully support that. Disputes resolution procedure, we wouldn't envisage moving away from any of our particular policies or procedures that we've got in place at the moment. We don't think there'd be any change whatsoever. I think the business case alludes to the code of practice on workforce matters already, and said that we would comply with that. I think does that answer all your questions, Simon?
So if we could bring in the unions quickly, Councillor Howard,
Yeah, you've
just
made
to
it very
respond to
clear
that.
I think the union may want to respond, perhaps.
I mean, those are obviously welcome assurances. I stand to be corrected, but I didn't see any particular reference to the code of practice. But by and large, that is a welcome response. However, if I can refer you back to the earlier, more general points we made about the ADM, those commitments are welcome, but one of the slides that you showed earlier spoke in terms of a tapering management grant, so not just not accounting for inflation, but it seemed to be a real terms reduction. So I'm afraid while we welcome those assurances, surely something else needs to happen to be able to give us any kind of real comfort and guarantee that those things can actually be achieved in what is potentially a reducing income stream. Because there is a bit of scepticism about how quickly you're going to be able to grow this company commercially.
Do you wish to address that?
Yes, please. On the slide that I showed you, the grant, we imagined that the grant would be fixed for a 5-year period. What I haven't demonstrated here is actually the business plan for the actual ADM. And I think I do refer to it in the business case. It's probably tucked away there in section 5 and 6. But there's certainly an intention to grow services over the next 5 years. I think the growth in income is something like £600,000 from day 1 to year 5. So there are a huge amount of new income generation ideas, which would take me probably another couple of hours to share with you on an individual basis what that is. I'm more than happy to share that with you, Peter, if you'd like to see it.
Great. Back to Councillor Howarth.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're all well aware that we need to do something here. It's been made very clear with budgets, etc., that we can't continue as we are. I think that question's been asked on many, many occasions. I am concerned that we don't have in here as consultees our schools. Our leisure centres are built around our four main schools. The boards of them schools are autonomous. They run separate to this council, so the service level agreements, the SLAs are with whoever they have. But what I don't see in this document is discussions with them of what they do have off the council free, what they do have, what they've got to pay for. There's nothing in here at all, and I am wary that if a new company is set up, and I'll give you an example, cutting grass at a leisure centre doesn't mean you're cutting grass for the leisure centre, it means you're cutting grass for the school as well. So there'll be two SLAs there. So there's lots of crossovers here, but there's nothing in this document to say we've had that discussion with the schools. Car parking is another issue. It may be you may want to expand, you may want to do things. There's so much with our schools for our leisure centres, there's nothing here. And I thought there may have been, because it was asked last time about this. What do they pay for? Do they pay for maintenance on the leisure centres, our schools? I'm not on the board of any of our schools, our main hub schools, so I don't really know that. But that would have been nice that our schools had been consulted, or our boards of our schools. There's nothing here. So I'd like an answer to that, of what they do contribute towards leisure services. Is it fair? It may not be fair. It may be that actually the income stream from our schools needs to be looked at severely. There may be no contribution, or it may be too much. Sorry, but there's nothing here.
Yep, do you want to respond?
Okay, thank you. Just to assure you, there will be consultation happening with the schools. I've been working for the last couple of months now on looking at the grants that schools give to leisure services for the use of facilities, and likewise what the leisure services actually use within the school environment in an evening. Schools are also given an indicative budget for property maintenance and maintenance of the grounds, so we're well aware of those figures now. That's actually been put together in a document currently over the summer. I've been working alongside CYP colleagues, and schools are aware, and we will be going in September to look at negotiating new SLAs with them for implementation in September 2018. So it's a really valid question, Councillor Howarth, and it is something that we will be looking at going forward. There are budgets there, and we just need to make sure that those budgets will be fair going forwards.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Alan Davis.
Thank you, Chair. My concern as somebody who has operated a multi-million pound business operation is that we all in this room, I'm sure, want this model to be successful. And in order to do that, it has to be commercial, it has to be managed correctly. And my concern is around, for example, if you look at the assets within the scope of the proposal, they currently have a maintenance backlog of £4.4 million. They also jointly have an operating deficit of £3.424 million. And we are predicting that by the end of year 5, they'll actually be making a profit of between £2 and £2.5 million. Now, we haven't got the details of what's that based on, what's the marketing analysis, what's the competition. There's no detail within this agreement like that. And there's also no mention of what funding is going to be available, because if this is to be a success, in my opinion, it is essential that management company has the ability to borrow money, to do it flexibly and manage as a business would be managed. And that is my concern about the lack of experience on the commercial side with the team that will be running it. There needs to be somebody in there that has a lot of experience of running something commercially. So that's my first question, is will the company management be free to access commercially available funding in order to implement capital investment? Because there will have to be investment. We're not going to stand still as we are. We're going to have to put things in that the public want in order to generate income, and therefore there needs to be capital available to do that. And the council certainly is in a position to do that. So will they be allowed to borrow capital? That's my first question.
Thank you. The assets will remain in the ownership of Monmouthshire County Council. There's certainly, in terms of the business plan that's going for the next 5 years, there's a sum of money that we will borrow from the council on our behalf, and we will repay that investment back over a 10 or 15 year period. That investment will be funded by the additional income generation, and also allow us some additional money then to reinvest back into services. I recognise that it probably will never never be enough to meet a £4.4 million backlog of maintenance. But I think without doing something differently, that 4.4 million is going to rise over the next 4 or 5 years and probably end up about £6 or £7 million. So what we'd be looking to do would be to, in some of our income generation ideas for the next 5 years, which have been independently tested by somebody else with a lot more professional and commercial experience than I, in terms of, yes, it is deliverable. So I think that, yes, we can borrow. We've had assurances from the Assistant Chief Exec and the Head of Resources that funding would be available to us. In terms of a commercial borrowing, the reason why we probably wouldn't get that commercial borrowing is at the moment, if this organisation went ahead as a charity, it's got no history, it's got no backlog, it's got no information, it's a new company, so you'd have a huge amount of risk. And so we've already come to the arrangement with Monmouthshire County Council that funding would be available on an investor save through prudential borrowing. So it is available for us, and we have built that into the business plan.
Okay. I'll curtail some of the comments I got to make.
Could you ask all your questions in one go, if that's all right,
I will.
please?
The other thing that concerns me is that if you're running any business, you need to be able to analyse the financial data in very clear detail to know where your expenditure is, know where there's possibilities to save. Now, my experience of the council's accounting system is that, trying to find the answer is like trying to find dark energy and dark matter. It's almost impossible to interrogate these systems. It's too generalised. You cannot run a business with that accounting system. So my other question is, will the company have its own accounting system, and will the different elements within that company also have their accounting system so you can analyse the performance of each element of the company? Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to answer that?
Yes. As with, because it's always going to be a new business, and I think for the first 12 months you would expect to be able to concentrate on trying to deliver that business, make sure it's set up correctly, the fact that some of your commercial, you're taking advantage of commercial opportunities. I think for the first year you'd want to rely on the existing systems because you want to be able to pay people, you want to pay your suppliers, you want to get that sort of information. In terms of the financial information that's available on the council ledger, I would probably beg to disagree with you about being an accountant. It is quite difficult and complicated to find your way around the system, but once you've cracked it, and I had been doing it for 20 years, so it did take me a long time, but I think we can certainly make sure that the systems we set up from the 1st of April will give us a much more detailed information, and I want to be able to work out, as you would expect with any business, to be able to understand how much it is to deliver that particular extra unit or that particular extra customer experience. So I'm fully aware of what the information I need to get. I think we can probably get 95% of it from the existing system.
Just to answer that, you cannot run a business unless you know where your expenditure is in detail. You need to have a system where you can look at an account sheet and say that this operation is in this position, we are spending X amount of money here, X amount of money there, and I don't think the current system can do that, frankly.
Okay, do you want to comment on that, or are we going to move on?
I don't think perhaps it's worthwhile me doing a defence of the ledger at the moment, but I'm quite happy to sit and talk to you about how the way the ledger can be structured to be able to get that information.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I wasn't aware I put my hand up, but thank you anyway. I was going to later. I was just listening to the discussion. One of the issues that I think, and I hope that this comes out as a recommendation from this committee, is that I do think that we need to look in detail at the accountability structure. And what I would make a recommendation, and I hope that other members of this committee would support me, is this is referred to the audit committee to look at the governance structure that will be available in relation to these particular arrangements. And if you look at page 55, which is page 49 as well, you'll see that it talks about the boards and who the non-executive directors are and so forth. I mean, I have had experience of this type of development as a Cheshire East councillor, because they went in for alternative service delivery models. And one of the things that the audit committee did is that it actually had the Section 151 officer draft a report and provide a governance structure for the ADMs, because one of the issues that has been raised by the union representatives is the problem is that obviously council-owned companies have various advantages, but there is a distance between the council-owned company and actually having it in-house in terms of accountability and so forth. And you'll see on page 55 that it talks about who the non-executive directors are. And there is a bullet point. It suggests that effectively the shareholder is either a cabinet or relevant member. But in terms of what happened in Cheshire East was that the current directors effectively became the directors of the company, but the non-executive directors were actually council members. Now, the advantage of that for other councillors is that when there was an issue in relation to services and residents complained that services weren't going the way that they hoped they would, that there was an easily contactable and identifiable person in the council who you could go to and you could say, either formally or informally, this doesn't seem to be working terribly well. Now the problem is that if you have a non-executive director, I can see the point in terms of their commercial skills and so forth if they're not actually a member, but that assumes that some members haven't got commercial experience, and we've just heard from somebody who has got good commercial experience. Then I think there is this divorce and this gap between members and the company. If it's Mr. So-and-so who nobody knows who's the non-executive director. And if you look at one of the bullet points there, it says, if the council decides that it will appoint any member as directors of either the technical or trading companies or both, effectively there should be sufficient other directors to basically neutralise what the member is saying. That's effectively what it says. Now I don't think that's acceptable. I think it's okay if you say that there's sort of a non-executive director who's got commercial experience, but I think we also need to have member involvement as well. The other issue that came up was that when Cheshire East made it quite clear that effectively members would be able to send emails to officers as if they were still council employees, so that there was a direct link with them. Now, one of the problems that was experienced to start with was that people were developing this identity, staff that distanced themselves from being a council-owned company. So in other words, if they were ODC Limited, then they were signing themselves ODC Limited. And I think that they all ought to be made clear at the bottom of this, a Monmouthshire County Council owned company, so that the identity is still remaining. Now obviously, I think from previous meetings there might be a different version of this from the advisors in relation to this, but I know that there are different ADM models, and I think that we should actually be looking at those in terms of accountability and in terms of who's going to be, for example, the trustees of the charity company, who's going to be involved, and obviously for a charity like a leisure centre, then that is probably more distant than a company is because of the accountabilities of companies in any event. But I do think we have to consider about this, because otherwise the council will end up having no policy direction on anything that's going on and will be totally distant from everything. And I don't think that's the way that you should that you should actually go, because at the end of the day, the Teckle company is supposed to be producing 80% public services, and the commercial is 20%. Now, obviously, for something that's been operating in a public service direction, then that's been more like the sort of the 100% model. But I think if we're going to totally neutralise members in the accountability structures and the way that we're setting up this thing, I don't think it'll work. Because, for example, on a policy basis, you'd be looking at things like, how do you charge on leisure centres? And in relation to the relationship with the schools, for example, if just to take Chepstow as an example, there's a car park there that is very close to the school. Now, at school dropping off and picking up times, I'm sure there's a reliance on that particular car park. Now, if you don't be careful about how you draft your contracts, you might end up with an outrage from parents because of the fact that there's charges placed on collecting the children if they use the leisure centre car park, or you end up with a massive traffic problem around a school because of the fact that you haven't got any control over the policies or any say about what goes on. So the accountability structure is vital here, and I think that this is something that needs to be referred to audit and audit committee to look at further, so that we get a proper governance structure and proper arrangements about who is involved as members and non-executive directors of these companies, so that there is some linkage between what the council actually wants and the direction it wants. And I would also like to see within that it actually suggesting, I haven't seen anywhere where it says residents first. And I think this is an important thing in terms of service delivery and in terms of being accountable to the residents who are we actually are elected to serve. So I think there's a bit of a further issue that needs to be looked at in terms of governance and who is actually on these boards as the non-executive directors. Thank you.
Thank you for that detailed contribution. Officers, would you like to stop neutralising members?
I would just like to say, come back to what we started the conversation about. The council, MCC, will still have full autonomy because you are commissioning services. The plan is very much the detailed business plan is looked at every year by members, where through select or through whichever process you feel most appropriate as members. There's an opportunity to have members on the board. So I don't think this is an opportunity. The terminology isn't the best, but neutralising members is certainly not what we're here to do. The Teckle company is wholly owned by the local authority. Members would only be members. There'd be no private individuals on that side of it. The charitable board, I would defer to Olwyn to give a comment on that, but I would imagine that you would want some members on that board.
I think in terms of if the comment that Councillor Brown is referring to is one on page 49, the bottom bullet, that's not a question of neutralising, it's a question of making sure a quorum is still available. That's a very different matter. You also mentioned the issue about making sure that the company is referred to as a council company. The local authority companies order requires that in any event that all of the letterheads etc. make it clear that it is a council-owned company. So I can set your mind at rest about that. In terms of who is on the board of the companies, it is purely a matter for the council. The council need, and I think we've set out in the papers in a fair amount of detail some of the pros and cons in relation to who the various members are, the various members of those boards are, in relation to the pros and cons of officers, the pros and cons of members, and the pros and cons of non-executive directors. But it is a matter for the council to make sure that you feel that you have the appropriate ownership, you are able to exercise the appropriate control, and you're able to ensure, as far as you can, that any of the persons that you appoint to those boards are not so conflicted out so regularly as to make it, frankly, a bit of a complicated issue because all of the time they're going to be conflicted out. It is a matter purely for you. As it says in the paper, the problem with members, the only problem with members as far as companies are concerned, I hasten to add, is that you have two lots of responsibilities if you are a member and a board director, neither of which you can legally avoid. One is that you have to act in the best interest of the council. The other is that broadly, it's set out in more detail in the papers, you have to act in the best interest of the company. Those are just matters that you have to weigh up. But it is a matter for the council as to who it wishes to have appointed onto the boards of those companies. As far as a charity is concerned, I think I referred before to the fact that in previous years, it used to be quite often the case that a council would set up a charity and the vast majority of the trustees of those charities would be appointed by the council. That is no longer the case. The Charity Commission won't accept that because charities have to be sufficiently independent from the council. But certainly, in many situations that I'm aware of, where a council has set up a charity, you have a mixture of people appointed by the council to the board and a mixture of independent trustees who are recruited for their particular skills and expertise in running the charity as well. So you have the right amalgamation. Because in all of this, what you're trying to do, and I go back to the point that was made before about you want this to succeed, is that you need to have a combination on the board who are running the company for you of the people who have got the right skills and experiences and expertise and the right value set as well. I think that's really important in order to make sure that these organisations, the charity, the companies, etc., have got the skills and experience which is most likely to enable what you have set up to succeed. Now, you know the people around, I don't, and you know the skills and experience that you will want to have on that board. But who you appoint is a matter for you.
Quickly, Councillor Brown.
I think I was just saying that I still believe that this needs to be referred to audit to look at in more detail because I appreciate the point that the solicitors have made in relation to about the conflict of interest. But on the other hand, in a sense, somebody who is totally looking at it from a commercial point of view might also have a conflict of interest between the fact that 80% of the work has to be public service based, and from that point of view may have even more of a conflict of interest than a member would. Thank you.
Okay, quickly, let's deal with the recommendation. The recommendation is to get the governance structure to be looked at by the audit committee. Is the audit committee already going to look at the governance structure, or was it?
I think it is part of their programme to look at the alternative delivery model and the process. I believe it is.
Can we double check? And if it's not, can we make sure it is? That's ideal. Councillor Blakeborough.
Thanks, Chair. Okay, I'll just go through my questions and then answer them at the end. Right, the first one, quickie. To date, we've spent 90,000 on consultancy fees to explore this model, and it's from the Investor Redesign Fund. I'd like to know where that money came from originally to form this fund. Looking financially, I do understand that we will get some tax relief, and that was 248,000 a year it kind of looked at, and some savings, which is highlighted 279,000 a year. It's suggested that the medium-term financial plan savings will be by 2020-21 will be 29.8 million. So I'd kind of like to know where that huge amount of money has come from. That's in the report. Because the only financial benefits I could see coming from this would be tax relief and maybe some grants that the council normally can't get, but it certainly wouldn't come to anything near that 29 million, but that is in the report, so that's why I'm asking the question. So I'd like to know where all this extra money is coming from, so where the savings are more than the 248 from tax relief and the 279 from the savings. when I read through the report, it was talking about needing to be more enterprising, that the company needs to be income generating, enhance opportunities, deliver contracts and partnerships. So that's a way of being more efficient and getting more money. But I don't fully understand why we can't do that with the setup that we have now. It also talks about that it's essential to empower and motivate staff to raise productivity, and that it needs to be efficient and effective. Putting these things in place, are we suggesting Monmouthshire isn't using good HR practice and leadership, and that they're not working collaboratively? So interdepartmental collaborative working should produce all of this. So what does business look like, and what will you do differently than that you can't do now in terms of meeting all of these elements, as I say, being enterprising, income generating, and developing contracts and partnership working, and again motivating staff. The other areas that I was a little bit concerned about, the strategic case for change. It talks about greater speed of decision making, respond quickly to market conditions, have a more commercial focus, better able to respond to opportunities. And again, I don't know why we can't do this within the Monmouthshire County Council, within the teams now. What stops us from doing this? It then goes on to talk about that we need to operate in a less restrictive environment, and that's when I start getting a bit worried. The council would no longer be directly responsible for the day-to-day delivery of the service. And Louise has mentioned a lot of our concerns, because I was thinking, are we setting this company up as a way of diverting from the scrutiny process and holding the council to account on their service delivery? And the reason why I'm a little nervous of this, because we have a history of CMC Squared, which kind of followed similar sort of process as this, and we did make a loss financially from that company, and that's why I'm really nervous about this. Looking at TUPE, obviously when you TUPE staff across, you can do that as long as there is an existing job in the new company. So my question is around, what if there isn't an existing job in that new company? Will there be redundancies? How many redundancies are we looking at? Being more flexible, a flexible workforce to respond to market forces. I kind of get a little bit nervous about that, because that seems to be suggesting that there'll be an increase of 0-hour contracts. There's a high level of 0-hour contracts in the leisure facilities particularly. So could there be an increase of that in order to be flexible there? And as I say, I would question whether there's going to be no redundancies at all, because you're going to work together in one company. You've got manager for each department. How many departments? About 6 departments, 7 departments there. Are you telling me there will be no redundancies of management staff? And it's interesting, actually. Sorry, I don't know your name. The union rep. Your name. What was your name? Sorry? Lorraine. Oh, Lorraine. I think Lorraine, for me, summarised or distilled the report to a brilliant summary, because she was saying it's the same people in the same places providing same services. The only benefit is your tax rebate from this process. So, yeah, I need to be convinced.
Convince her.
Sorry, can you? I mean, I know there was lots of points made there. Can you just give me three questions, and I'll try to do my best.
Microphone, Councillor Bickford.
I'd like to know where this extra money is coming from, other than the tax relief and maybe some grants that we'll get through. So I don't know how you're going to make all these savings. And as I say, in that report, it does suggest that the medium-term financial plan will see savings of 29.8 million by 2020-21. It's in there. I'd like to know why all these things can't be done with good leadership, good HR practice, and interdepartmental collaborative working, why we can't achieve all of these things you want to do with a new company. So what does business look like, and what will you do differently that you can't actually do now? And then, actually, Louise has covered a lot of the things about the decision making, because I am very nervous about that. As I say, we won't be involved from a day-to-day. And then assurance on the redundancies, that there will be no redundancies and that there will not be an increase of 0-hour contracts under the new system.
Thank you.
Chair, can I suggest that if Marie and Tracy and Ian pick up the financial and HR questions, I'll pick up the difference this looks to make comprehensively, if I could, please. Thank
As you see fit.
Come. Do you pick up the finance and the... Yeah, sure.
I was just going to talk a little bit about what we've already achieved in these services. We've done some brilliant things. No one's suggesting that the services do not work in a collaborative way. They do. However, the way they're structured at the moment does lead to some difficulty in moving teams and moving staff into different areas. We've done skills audits of all our teams, and believe it or not, some of our best people are in the wrong places at the moment, delivering the wrong thing. Yeah, we can move people. We can do, but it does take time, and it takes consideration. It takes a lot of consultation. There's lots of things we can do. All the things we've tried to mention today around a financial envelope and financial conditions. The transform in-house model is about growing services as well as the alternative delivery model. All the income pipelines we've put forward and all the figures that Maria's put together all include the same levels of income as if we're transforming in-house or we're doing an alternative delivery model. We've just put together all the conditions in one place, and the alternative delivery model, in the opinion of officers that have worked on this for a considerable amount of time, suggests that the alternative delivery model is the preferred option for that. We can transform in-house. We're not saying we can't, but it does depend on what your as members aspirations are for these services, because what we're talking about now is really growing our services, not closing, not shutting. If you look at the teams now we've got on our sites, they're highly motivated, but they are also extremely stretched. If we're talking about introducing new income streams, new models, new ways of working, that is about growing the workforce, growing talent and training and re-providing. So I do take your point, and I think Kelly wants to explain that in a bit more detail. The finance, I believe it is it looks a bit misleading the way it's presented. That's talking about council budget. There's no way these services are going to contribute that much over the time. We are talking about a very limited net budget here as well. So we're looking from everything that we've put together, just puts everything into a place where hopefully the case is, I understand where unions are saying that they can't see the case, but clearly when you put everything together, I think there is a case there. Was there another question I haven't answered there on finance?
The figure of 29 point whatever million it was. Sorry? Sorry, it's the budget for the whole and Yes. Oh, right, okay.
Kelly?
Chair, if I could just pick up a few points. Very well made, but I think it does require a much more comprehensive explanation. And members will be aware that over the next 4 years, we've got to save some 14 to 20 million pounds as a council. And as Ian's already outlined, when I joined this council 7 years ago, the budget for this service area was nearly 7 million. The net budget for this service area today, as we sit here, is just over 4 million. So you can see the extent of pace and progress that's been made over quite a short period of time. So yes, there have been cuts, but what we've relied on in particular with this set of service areas is quite aggressive income generation. Now, when you're trying to make cost savings, you're trying to reduce the cost of buildings, you're not getting any capital investment and you're pushing for income, it's very difficult to make all of those things equate and make all of those different ends meet. There's lots of different competing priorities in this context. And I don't think we're saying that this is a panacea. This model that we're putting forward is a silver bullet. It's still going to be faced with very many of the same challenges. But what we're talking about here is a model that gives different freedoms and flexibilities, as I think that's been outlined. And I'm not saying that gives us carte blanche to take stupid risks. And we all know there's a big difference between risk-taking and risky behaviour. There's a world of difference, in fact. But I just want to give a few examples in terms of where we are, just to make you sort of understand why an alternative approach is required. So as I've outlined, we rely on this service area very much for income generation through events, weddings, concerts, you name it. And just a couple of weeks ago, we were in a situation where one of our buildings, where we house some of these events, needed some urgent repair work. That repair work was going to go ahead. It was planned, it was scheduled. At the same time, an incident arose with a school that needed an urgent repair. Now, of course, we'd advocate that the urgent repair work was done in the school, but the consequence is we couldn't have that urgent repair work done in that building that we're all reliant upon for income generation. So yes, we'd all agree that the priority has to be the school, because safeguarding and well-being of children is the most important thing. But then this service area can't be expected to generate the same levels of income if the building isn't fit for purpose. So we're in a situation, members, where there are no neutral decisions. We can't have a school fixed on one of our buildings. That just isn't the case with the resources that we have available to us. And I think it's a really great question. Well, aren't we commercial? Aren't we business-like now? Well, yes, as far as we possibly can be. But, you know, to make this council, you know, really commercial is a big job. It takes time. You know, we have to ingrain new practices, new procedures, new mindsets. It's a culture of commercialism that we need to embed. That is not going to happen quickly. And these guys do not have the time, because if we can't get new practices, processes, mindsets underway quick enough, then we will definitely be in a situation where we manage decline. Now, that may be sustainable. We may say it's sustainable for us to gradually close a number of leisure centres, cultural facilities and events. But I don't think that's the reason we all get out of bed in the morning. We're driven by our purpose. We're vocational public servants. And we've been very neutral throughout this process. We've played devil's advocate. We've questioned. We've challenged one another. And I think the proposal that we have on the table today provides the best option for sustainability and resilience of the services that are so important to us and our communities.
Thank you, Kelly. Councillor Feekins.
Thank you, Chair. MCC are very good at delivering staff, and staff comes at a cost, 20% for argument's sake. Why are we going to create another cost centre within the tech organisation? Why can't MCC simply supply staff at cost plus 5% or something along those lines?
I think if what you're saying is, do we have another cost centre so we have a completely separate trading company?
No, what I mean is it costs money to run staff. Why can't the new company, the new formation, just simply take staff from MCC continues running the staff element?
That is the intention. What you tend to have these days is joint employment contracts, so that if the staff are working for the trading company, then in effect they're staff who are employed by the technical company who are working for the trading company for those purposes. It's quite a common thing to do these days. Now, what happens in the future, obviously, I don't know. I mean, there could be the situation where if you find that staff are in the, and I think we're talking quite some way down the line, are wholly employed by the trading company, that's a different matter. But I think that's something which is, I would, look at my colleagues on my left. I think that is something that's way down the line. At the moment, it's usually they're employed by the technical company and transferred to do trading activity as and when necessary.
So my point there, I'll just come back very quickly. My point really was, why can't MCC continue employing the staff and satisfy all the union issues, and simply supply those staff out to the ADM at cost plus 5%, which would still be cheaper than the ADM running its own staffing centre, and MCC would be still in charge of those staff, and it would give the ADM the flexibility to employ staff or take on staff as and when.
Well, in effect, you have a TUPE situation. And so what would happen is that they would go into the technical company. Now, certainly it has sometimes been tried that you keep staff in the council. In my experience, when councils have tried to do that, it hasn't worked, because in effect, you've got a TUPE situation anyway.
just very quickly then. So when and this might not work, maybe something technical with the organisation you've got, but if we want to do work for the Trunk Road Agency, for argument's sake, we do work for the Trunk Road Agency at cost plus 5%. Why can't MCC continue employing all the staff and therefore take care of all the administration costs of employing staff and simply supply those staff, charge them out to the new organisation?
That has been tried. It has been tried. And I know of places that it's been done. As I said, in my experience, where council tried to do that, what they found is that they created a TUPE situation anyway, and it hasn't really worked on the long term. I think the other aspect of this, and it's not really a legal question, it's more a culture question, is that what you're trying to create, I think, is a different environment, very much as Kelly was saying, and actually having the staff tied into the new organisation, I think, has got significant benefits to it. My colleagues will probably participate in that.
Has the council got a view on that?
No, I'm just going to briefly say that when a charity, when staff are seconded to a charity, the charity isn't able to reclaim VAT. Now, the secondment of staff is treated by HMRC as a taxable supply, so therefore that would be an additional 20% cost to the charity. So it's obviously cheaper for the charity to employ them directly.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. Before I ask my question, just one comment on the fact that the analogy has been used that we've got to repair a school before one of our assets. If the ADM is created, where will the money come to do those school repairs, which may be urgent? I think I got some sort of answer you might give, but really, you're saying at the moment that you need the opportunity to repair a school as opposed to an asset. It doesn't seem feasible to me at the end of the day. My main question really is back to the staffing considerations. A lot of talk about the transfer of staff and 2P and not what. But you did say, and it's in the report, that it's only anticipated that the ADM would recognise appropriate trade unions. I got concerned that anticipated is there. Really, that should be said and done rather than anticipation. Based on the fact that just 50% of TLYC employees are represented by a trade union. And equally, further on in the report, it talks about staff boards. Would the ADM be started to prefer to have a staff board than have a trade union? And equally, the pensions consideration, it's indicated that Greater Gwent Pension, I declare an interest, I'm a member of the Greater Gwent Pension Fund, that 11% of management costs would go towards pensions. I would anticipate that an ADM would try and reduce its costs because staff are your biggest assets on the basis that you've got none of the tangible assets under your control, just the staff. And staff would be your biggest asset, biggest cost. And there's nothing clear in my mind, reading the report, that trade unions will be properly recognised when I see the word anticipated. I got concerns that the 2P will take place, yes, but 2P doesn't last forever.
Can someone address Councillor Eason's concerns?
Can I start, Chair, just by saying the analogy I used around the school, Councillor Eason, was just really to sort of outline the competing situation these services find themselves in. And as I say, you know, there's no neutral decisions at the minute. We're in a scenario of it's one or the other. That's the financial envelope that we have to work within. And just I'll let the guys explain some of the technicalities around 2P because I think it could add some value to this session, Chair, if we could just outline that again. And I would say that, you know, working with the union is a two-way street. I think it's been a fairly positive experience to date. There's been quite a lot of engagement and I think that's been appreciated on both sides. But your point about 2P again doesn't last forever. You know, I don't think there's any such thing as a job for life in a council environment anymore. I think things are changing so greatly and we're in really uncharted territory. I just don't think we can have that realistic expectation of any of us anymore.
Okay, thanks.
Could I? Of course.
Yes, thank you. I mean, we've set this out in the report because, in effect, what tends to happen is that TUPE is largely a question of fact. If you are working for one organisation and the work that is being done there transfers to another organisation, then you're wholly or mainly employed there, you transfer. It's a question of fact. As I've said before, I am aware of councils who have tried sometimes to avoid TUPE. And it's a legal issue. Avoiding TUPE is avoiding a question of fact, really, by seconding. In my experience, when those councils tried to do it over a period of time, it hasn't worked, because in effect the employees have transferred. And secondments have only worked on a sort of either short-term basis, or where, for example, you have a property company you're setting up where, in effect, you don't have any employees. You maybe just have a director seconded from the council. I absolutely understand the sensitivities about this, but I think that very largely, frankly, it is a question of fact that people do transfer. And I think that colleagues have referred to the fact that there are no guarantees in this world, but I think certainly the intentions, as far as they've been explained to me, is that staff members will be treated as fairly as possible, and that is, I think, very much the intention. Ever since I've been working with the council, that's all that has been expounded to me.
Okay, thank you. I've got 18 other questions, but I'll leave them. You've had them in writing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you. Mine's quite a simple question about the relationship between the council and the ADM board. On page 60, it says that key performance indicators are used to ensure the progress of the ADM, etc. And it says there'll be a monthly overview and then an annual report and periodic council meetings. Well, as we've already said, there is a risk with anything. In business, you only need a couple of challenges, a couple of crises, and things can go wrong very quickly. I'm a bit concerned about that word periodic. How often will the council be updated?
Could someone address those concerns, please?
I would imagine it would be best practice to visit council twice a year. I would think one for scrutiny of the business plan each year, and then one for a 6-monthly update and report. I would imagine also the audit, we would have internal and external audit on the alternative delivery model as well. So the performance indicators clearly are a measure. I think Olwyn has mentioned that there are some high-level indicators that could tell us if things are good, if things are bad. And I think it's really to get on the front foot with those key performance indicators to make sure that things are going in the right direction. But I think that monthly board meeting and then the challenge of 6 monthly and yearly reporting would be at a minimum, I would imagine. But again, it's members who can input into that side. And if you feel more or less, then that's, again, prerogative of members to decide.
Yeah, obviously this will have to be discussed, but I personally feel twice a year isn't enough. That's a personal opinion.
That's for council to decide. Councillor Pavia.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, officers have stated that a lot of time of investment and resource have been put into exploring the ADM over the last 3 years. So as a new member, I just want to strip this right back to basics and try to understand why officers have come to this particular ADM, the TECL, the charity and the trading arm. You say in 2.13 that you went out firsthand to look at other ADMs and other local authorities. Where were those ADMs located? What local authorities? Were they all in leisure tourism services? Were they in property services? Were they in social care? Why have you come to this particular model? That's my first question. Perhaps if you answer that one first, and I'll come to my second question.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pavia. It's correct. We have gone and visited a lot of different trusts. Some are very similar in the makeup, but the overall blanket of services we're talking about, I think the one that compares most favourably is one in Peterborough called Vivacity, and we went to see them and talked about some of the pitfalls and some of the good practice and some of the great progress that they've made over their time. We've been, colleagues to my right have been, and I've been to Wigan to see a social services, social care trust and also a leisure trust. As chair of the Gwent Leisure, Active Gwent, I meet regularly with the chief executives of Newport Live, Torvine Leisure Trust and an Iron Leisure in Blaenau Gwent. And I've got a very open relationship, so I do talk about what they've gone through and how positive each one of those are about what they're now delivering and how they're delivering those services. So I think we have got quite an extensive knowledge of what's going on. I think it gives us some comfort that others have gone before us. We're not first. We're a long way, shall we say, down the line of some services being delivered in a different way through a lot of councils, particularly in England. In Wales, most leisure services now are delivered by a different mechanism. We are actually probably one of the last, shall we say, to be exploring these different models. I don't know. Do you want to mention anything from your travels?
Well, thank you. I mean, we're working with a lot of councils across England and Wales to put into place different structures. In the last 7 years, I was going to say 5 years, but the last 7 years really, since the 2010 election, councils obviously have had to look at providing different services in very different ways. The whole commercialisation agenda has really taken off, both in terms of looking at different ways to provide services where you're able to access grant funding, for example, which you wouldn't be able to access if the services were run through the council, which is one of the reasons for proposing a charity in some instances. Sometimes having mutuals where maybe you don't set it up as a mutual, but the aim is in 5 years' time it will be a mutual. So when staff transfer, it's very, they know that they've got a vested interest coming forward to the sort of arrangements that we're suggesting here. But as I think I said at the start, I think where you have got a number of different service areas, there are different solutions for the service areas, which is why we're proposing the split really between the Teckle company and the charity to take advantage of the differences really in how those services are delivered and the different opportunities that there are for the councils there. And so no model is exactly the same as any other model. It's a question of looking at best practice and how you can bring that best practice to bear on the particular situation that you're facing, I think.
Thank you. So other models have been, mutual models have been explored, and this was felt, this particular setup was the best option for us.
Yeah, we started with a process that everything was complete private outsourcing, was explored. There was lots of different models, and we've had advice and spoken to lots of different organisations, and so I think we have extensively researched the area, and clearly we had to come to some model, and this was the preferred model.
Thanks, Chair. Just one more question. In terms of setting up or delivering services within the ADM, do you envisage a situation where the council might be providing services that are going to compete with local businesses within Monmouthshire? Situation maybe, I don't know, if you set up a tea room or a coffee shop within a TIC perhaps, and you've got that franchise in that building because it falls within the ADM. Is there potential unfair practice there? Have those issues been explored?
They've been explored, and clearly with our engagement, stakeholder meetings, I think we have gone out extensively and said, what we're trying to achieve here. I think we've got to be realistic that to keep these services sustainable, we are going to have to be competing. I know that the Minister Ken Skates, when he addressed a leisure crowd, was very much talking about how it's important to make sure that you're increasing your secondary spend to make things more sustainable. We are running like a business now, so yes, I guess market forces are going to dictate what we do deliver, and I think there might be a time when we do unintentionally, or intentionally, whichever way, you are going to compete with certain areas in the leisure and hospitality business by its very nature. It's a big private sector area, isn't it? So yes, I would imagine we would be competing.
Can I just add to that this is one of the reasons why, if councils are going to trade commercially they have to have a company. Because if you have a company, you make a profit, you have to pay corporation tax. And the reason that was brought in was exactly that council should not be having a benefit over a private company which is having to pay corporation tax.
Thank you. Ms Gaskell.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back to Councillor Eason. I know that's a little while ago, but just referring back to the trade union recognition section of the document that states at present approximately 50% of the employees are members of a trade union. It's just a little presumptive to put that into the document, as the authority wouldn't have exact figures on trade union membership, as we do have a significant portion of people who keep it confidential and pay via direct debit.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and we'll take that on board. I would just like to comment, though, by the very nature that we do have high numbers of union representation, and at all levels of the organisation. I think it's clear that the intention of the unions to ensure that best practice is followed, it gives some definite advantages to the people that aren't, to members that aren't in unions. So obviously best practice is the way to go, and obviously consulting and having that engagement with unions is a positive, not negative.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Okay, thank you very much. All these services that we're looking at within the alternative delivery plan model, they're not statutory duties upon the council, they're actually discretionary, aren't they? I could see the benefit of the alternative delivery model in that you could achieve grants and there were tax benefits. The public pay their tax in different ways then. But so far as the model was concerned, there was a financial benefit. I was interested in the fact that the whatever body it is will be able to secure money, borrow money. But basically, it looks as if the council is going to be underwriting those capital costs through prudential borrowing, which, although that's quite sort of reasonable, it does mean that there could be another cost to consider to the council. And then the other little thought that went through my mind, there was the reference to CMC squared. We've got a trust for the Borough Theatre. Now, do these arrangements in any way impact on that trust? Because that's a tapering arrangement, I understand.
I think it's difficult to comment on the Borough Theatre Trust. Obviously, officers work with that trust, and there are at the moment some conversations going on between the Borough Theatre and Monmouthshire County Council. So I'll leave that there, if I may. I think the question of statutory or non-statutory, there are some elements of these services that are statutory, some elements of the youth service, some elements of countryside services. So there are some areas, certainly some of the play sustainability. There are some statutory responsibilities inside, but that really, whether they're statutory or discretionary or non-discretionary, it's just words that we're clearly going to continue to deliver on behalf of MCC.
Okay, a number of councillors want to put their hand up for a second question. Any councillors who haven't had a question want to ask a question? Now is the time. Nope. Oh, Councillor Debbie.
I might be being a little bit stupid here, so I'll apologise in advance. You were talking just now to my colleague there about the things like cafes and where we might get involved with the TIC and that sort of thing. Bearing in mind that might be in conflict with other businesses who are paying business rates, etc., and how a hotter topic that is at the moment. What would be the position of the business that we are going to enter into? Do we pay business rates? Because if we're going to get into certain businesses that conflict or are competing with the ordinary commercial a punter outside, are we not, if we are we not, do we not have a significant advantage over them? And is that something that might be raised outside and come back and bite us politically?
Councillor Dovey, all of the assets that will be in the Teckle company will have to pay business rates. And any charges we make through the Teckle company or charges from Monmouthshire to the Teckle company have to be made at real cost. There's no subsidisation because you run the risk of state aid. So everything within the local authority company will have to be costed correctly. There should be no subsidisation because we don't want to break those state aid rules. In terms of the charity, though, the charity has got some benefits in terms of relief on their buildings through NDR, and that's why they're particularly in that particular area. But obviously, with the charity, you don't have to worry about the state aid rules as such.
Can I ask a quick question around the youth service? It hasn't been mentioned yet, and it's. I just don't want to get lost in this new model. It's a critical service. Many young people access it who have come troubled times. I'll put it like that. And I noticed from you there's a survey in there about they have a safe place to go and there's access to advice. Can you just give me greater clarity over the role of the youth service in this area? What do you expect it to do? What do you expect it not to do? I noticed you hope to put it out to consultancy so it can generate income possibly. I see it as a green on there. Could you just give me a greater feeling for that role of the youth service in the current ADM model, please?
I think it's clear that when you speak to the people in the youth service, obviously they're so passionate and they're really experts at their job, and I think the youth service as it stands is so skilled in 3 different areas: the counselling team, which is very specialist, the educational side, and the enterprise and job creation and thinking about the next generation of skilled children and going through into employment. But then the bit that best sits in the alternative delivery model is the extracurriculum opportunities and the support to children and young people to have the maximum opportunities, whether that's in art, whether it's in drama, whether it's in play, whether it's in leisure. And what we have seen from the way that the teams are working now is the offer is a greater offer through things like Positive Futures, programmes that really do target specific areas. So we're not focusing so much on buildings, we're focusing more on programmes and going out to engage and have bigger conversations with young people and making sure that the provision is in place. We believe that outdoor education, leisure and the youth service together provide the maximum opportunities for those young people. And throughout our communities, whether it's rural, whether it's in the town, slightly different needs. So the youth team have been exploring all different options. They've bought equipment that goes out to communities with domes, and they recently had 130 children from Caldicott Comprehensive on a Duke of Edinburgh experience. So the offer, we believe, is being maximised and really starting to be beneficial to young people. There is also the two trusts, and I think probably Tracy, you're in a better place to talk about the Caldicott zone and the attic, which I think there was a question from Councillor Eason last time that you mentioned about whether they'd be lost. Well, the alternative delivery model would provide teams into those trusts, and those buildings are not assets of Monmouthshire. Anyway, they've gone across to those. Do you want to just clarify that, Tracy?
To respond to that, what I was asking was the actual charity, the Caldicott Youth Group, what position they had in the fact that they put £70,000 into that building. I've had an answer in any case, no.
Just for clarification there with regards to the youth service, we do have 2 historical relationships with Monmouth Youth Project in Monmouth and Caldicott Youth Group in Caldicott, where we run the attic base in Monmouth and the zone in Caldicott. The arrangements being as a registered charity, they can secure additional income. They, Peppercorn, lease both of those buildings off the council, and they supply all the monies that are related to any repairs on the building and costs of running those buildings. and the youth service will put staff into those buildings to make sure they're engaged with young people. We don't anticipate those relationships changing going forward, because obviously it just strengthens our offer going forward.
So can I just be clear, would you appreciate the youth service to be in the charity section, or the trading company section, or the tech? Can it just be, or is it just going to be amongst all? It's not going to be a distinct thing in one area. Is it going to be amongst all of them?
It predominantly sits in the charity because of the grants that we can attract for it.
Sorry, Councillor Bajuni, just to be absolutely clear, there are various segments of the youth service, as Ian has described. The one youth enterprise would remain with the council. That sits very much with Kath Fallon's team and Hannah Jones in terms of employability, skills development for young people. And the second bit is the face-to-face counselling service. And I think Tracy will correct me if I'm wrong, but almost, over 95% of its business is into our schools in Monmouthshire. So those two segments of the youth service would be remaining very firmly with Monmouthshire County Council. It's the bit that Tracy and Ian have just described that would actually go across to the ADM.
Okay, thank you. Second question, just quickly if we may, brevity please. Councillor Howarth.
I will pose my question by email, I think, to Kelly. It's only reference to the outdoor education centres, i.e. the business case, the prudential borrowing, Hillston Park, etc., Team Hour, them things, they're massive places. Capital funding is going to be massive for them long term. I don't see anything in the report there, but it does say about prudential borrowing, which the council is going to make prudential borrowing and pay all whatever it has to pay on that. So I'll pose that question, if you don't mind. Thank you. Okay, posted by email. Councillor Feekins.
Just one quick point on the pension liability, which was picked up by the unions earlier. Are we careful that we're not loading up these organisations, the ADM, with liability issues? Because ultimately what's going to make them successful or not successful is their cost.
Discussions are still ongoing with the head of resources about that arrangement. The preference for the ADM would be to go based on the fact that the assets and liabilities will be fully funded at day one. But that's a discussion that's still ongoing.
So if I may, will that be underwritten by MCC in that case?
I don't know the answer to that question yet.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Basically, just coming back to the accountability issue, if you look on page 60, which I think Councillor Pratt has previously mentioned about periodic council meetings, it's to do with really the audit coming up with a governance structure, and I think that, as you as chairman said, you check on that, but I do think it's important to note that this is something that needs to be looked at together with not only the governance in terms of reporting to the council, but also in relation to non-executive directors. And I think the other thing that actually comes up is about the contract itself, because one of the things it talks about is key performance indicators, and that's a way of measuring performance. But obviously, in relation to again, I think that's on page 60. Again, in relation to KPIs, one of the issues, I think the NHS ended up abandoning KPIs because they thought it was better to concentrate on outcomes. And, it could be a hospital was meeting its KPIs and loads of the patients were dying, So, I think, there has to be a bit of a balance here, and also, there needs to be flexibility in the contract so that if the council finds that it's in the terms and conditions that it's not working terribly well, then those sort of things can be actually reviewed, because obviously the contract is important. One of the issues that we haven't actually dealt with, which I think was raised by the union representative, was the length of the agreements, and the reason why the length of the agreements is suggested as such, and perhaps there could be some feedback on that particular point. Thank you.
Absolutely, the recommendation has been taken forward and we'll make sure it goes to the audit committee. If it's not already going, I can see the cabinet member for governance at the back as well. I'm sure he heard your views. On the point about the length of the contract.
When we were in the early days engaging with the other authorities and the other sort of vehicles we discussed, they said just that 5 years is really important for how you get some continuity. I think there's some issues around the 3 year with the charity, isn't there, about the tendering, but that's something that we need to really focus on, isn't it? I think we were looking at a 3 year and a 5 year, but do you want to explain that, or is that not, you're not? No. Okay. So the 5 years is something that we, really is the best. We would love a 10-year agreement, but that's just not going to happen. So I think 5 years is something that we would recommend as best practice. Owen, have you got a view on that?
No, I mean, I think that you need to have something which allows, you need to strike the balance between tying in too much for the benefit and disadvantage of either party, but also having something which enables the ADM to establish itself and start to get going. So I think that that 5 years is a good model. You can have it depends on negotiation. You can have break clauses after 3 years and that sort of thing. You would have break clauses in any event. Just to add one other thing is that in terms of looking at KPIs and performance measurement, one of the key things that the council will have in approving the business model and the performance of the Teckle company is the business plan. That's different from the business case. The council's shareholder should approve the business plan that the Teckle company has got for the forthcoming year, and then you measure against that, because that then very clearly sets out what the company is intending to achieve, when it's intending to achieve it, and actually also how it's intending to achieve it as well. Because I think I've said previously that values, and I know it's reflected in the report, values are really important as well. I've rarely worked for a council who has said the only thing they're bothered about in terms of any alternative delivery model is that it makes as much profit as possible. Because you have other considerations, and that some of these have been reflected in the discussion today, that you will, I'm sure, want to build in when you look at the business plan that the council is approving.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Breakborough.
Thanks. 3 quick questions. Really just still interested to know where the Invest to Redesign Fund comes from, where that money comes from. Second question is to the youth service. Because one of the areas is for income generation, and I know that the last budget, the youth service was unable to make their mandate because you had to generate money, income, and you weren't able to do it. And I'm just wondering how being part of the ADM can help you generate money that being part of the council doesn't. So what's that difference? And then the third one, the Councillor Pavier spoke of this, and this is a main area of concern for me, because there seems to be definite contradictions, I suppose, because I thought our role as an authority was to provide an environment where local businesses, small businesses can thrive, and yet we're setting up a system to compete against them. And for example, cafes, when going out to tender, you'll get a family business to run a cafe, and we're going to now say, no, we're going to do it, and we're basically putting people out of jobs and taking their livelihoods away. Are you comfortable with that?
Hopefully not.
I think I'm more comfortable in saving these services from closure. I think that's where the motivation's got to be, around our focus and our delivery. Clearly, we want a quality service. We want to deliver from our background, our history of delivering, certainly on the leisure side of it, income. But we've got to be realistic about where we do compete and where we don't. Leisure, by its very nature, has already got cafes. It's already got, whether we do it very well or not, is subject to where we are at this moment in time. I don't think we do it very well in leisure, our cafe offer. I think we've got a lot of opportunity there. I think our attractions, some of them are, you go to them and there's a lot of people that go through the door, but do we actually make sure that some of the income is spent in those attractions? And all this is going to sustain these services going forward. So we've got to be realistic about where our markets are. We do have a huge amount of visitors and tourism coming into our towns, and I agree there's only so many coffee shops you can have. But ultimately, you know, we've got to make choices, and we've got to, you know, make sure that these services are sustainable.
Just on that point, I've heard you talk about greater edge, move nimbly in market conditions. Can you give me an example where we can't do that now?
This is quite a difficult one, because I started my speech today about we do not want to start going into territory where being inside local authority, you know, and criticise the way that political procedures and decisions are made. And every time we've come with a business case or a business plan, we do get, you know, very positive reaction from members. And I think on several occasions we have, you know, been able to come forward with business cases where we have had increased opportunities. I think there are times when it is quite difficult to get decisions quickly and at speed, just because of the very nature of all your members are busy and getting slots in timetables and calendars, and I think the leisure industry by its very nature moves quickly, and it's quite a, should we say, a themed and a quick move and move on. And I think by the time sometimes we act in that way, it's quite difficult.
So democratic process, in a sense.
I wouldn't want to criticise the democratic process as a local authority servant, and you know, it's part of where we've all been for the past 20, some of us 25 years. However, at times it is quite frustrating as an officer to not be able to move as quickly as we'd like to.
Kelly?
Yeah, I just want to make that point absolutely clear, Councillor Petrucci. This is not about dodging democratic processes. This is about greater transparency and openness. And as I think I've said already, you know, is this council commercial? It tries to be. It competes now with the private sector on many different services and functions. We do grass cutting, we have depots that offer private sector services. So if we're going to talk about competitive environments, we're already in them. That's the reality. So coming back to my point, this is not about trying to sort of contravene or circumvent democratic processes. I think come back to that question, is the council commercial? It is, but it's not commercial enough. And these guys just don't have the time to wait. That's why I think today one of the recommendations is about taking the further step to explore that proposed environment.
First two questions of Councillor Breitbart.
Sorry, yeah, the Investor Redesign Fund, Councillor Breitbart, is a specific ring-fence service reserve that we have set up. From the coffers to facilitate, you know, exploration into issues such as this. Yeah, sorry, I should have said that earlier.
Can I just ask councillors to speak into their mic, because the public won't be able to hear you.
Sorry, and then just the youth service.
Inability for the youth service to meet its mandate.
Well, I think Kelly's already explained that the two areas that won't be coming are the counselling service and the enterprise side of it. So the bit that is coming across is the bit that potentially has got the ability to generate and look at new ways of working with the leisure team. So the mandates weren't made last year, and there's been a repositioning of budgets. So those services made in the counselling have had additional funding. There's been 2 new posts, one in arts therapy and one in drama therapy. So, you know, it's really positive news on that respect. But you're right, it's very difficult to make income out of young people who need a service.
Okay, time is getting on. Last few questions, and then we'll call it a halt. Councillor Eason.
Thank you. Just a couple of general questions. Some years ago, when MHA took over the housing stock transfer, they set up their own office system, their own IT systems, and they would completely separate themselves from the authority, although members of the public still call them the council. So how long would it be before you have your own HQ for your own base? Would you have your own separate IT systems? And would you have your own back office staff to separate yourself directly in operational matters from the council, although you were still you were still underneath the umbrella of the council in general terms? Am I correct in that last assumption?
The plans as they're going forward are to work with like the SRS and services, because they're fundamental to how we deliver broadband and the systems into the leisure sites and some of the outlying areas. I think there would be a change in the way that those teams operate. If you're talking about, certainly not going to be a call centre, but clearly one of the things that does happen at the moment is if you phone Caldecott Castle or you phone Old Station Tintern, the teams are quite stretched, and at the leisure centres as well, all the calls maybe aren't handled as well as they could be. So we do intend to change some of the office functions, the clerical functions, and I think the teams are exploring some of those at the moment. I know Richard, the business development manager there, has got his ideas about how sales and marketing could be delivered in a better, more efficient way across our sites, and I think it would be an opportunity missed if we didn't explore those efficiencies and look at different ways of working, clearly with consultation with the people that deliver that service.
Sorry, in the report, there's a suggestion that some back office staff could themselves become two-paid, other than on top of the 351, as part of the wider process of reorganisation, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that is true. We're going through a process now of establishing all of the total support service costs that are attributable to these services. And for instance, it might work out, and I haven't got the final figures, that for instance, the cost of a payroll section might mean that it's actually equivalent to a post, and that post would transfer across. So that's part of the 2P rules. But until we've gone through that evaluation, or the finance team have gone through that evaluation, I can't tell you exactly what that might mean. But yeah, there might be some support staff that are currently back office in Monmouthshire that would transfer across. But that's part of an ongoing exercise at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. One of the questions that I was going to ask, which I didn't get the chance to ask, but I think it's relevant to some of the comments that have just been made. Yes, there's got to be democratic feedback to this council, but it would be a mistake for this council to put people who are in charge of this company in the position where their arms are tied behind their back and they can't make decisions on a day-to-day basis. So there has to be a balance, yes, but it's very important that people have the freedom to make business decisions and to go ahead with those business decisions without having going through a bureaucratic system and having to refer back every time they want to do something, because if that happens, then this model definitely will fail. Thank you, Chair.
Is that it for the questions? Or was a last word to the Cabinet member? Okay, Councillor Greenland.
Thank you, Chair. We've spent just over 2 hours, I think, debating it. And I think we have had some really good questions coming forward, questions that have been well answered. But I think also there are things that we further need to look at in light of what has been raised this afternoon. And I know officers are going to spend the next month or so further working through the system. I've been Cabinet member responsible for these services for a number of years now, and I have been well aware that when there are cuts to be made, they are made to the services that, such as we're talking about now, because these are not priorities for this council. The council priorities, quite rightly in my view, are education, social services. Those are the big money spenders. If we were to widen our priorities, then frankly, almost nothing would be a priority, and we'd be taking money from those services to feed this one. It has become obvious to me that we needed to look at a new model. Whether this is the right one or not, the decision is not yet made. But when we set out, we knew that other councils had been down this route. We knew that some of them had failed, and many had made a good job of it. Which way we were to go was vitally important to us. We needed as much evidence as we could, and we needed to bring in consultants to advise us on the best way forward in the light of what had happened to others before. I think that's what we've done. In terms of members, including Cabinet, we have not made a decision yet on whether this is the right model for us. But nothing comes without risk. Certainly, there is a huge risk in staying as we are, because as we know, we are going to manage decline if we do nothing. Whether the risks of this particular model have been so negated to be reasonable for us to take, that's what we have to decide. The process from here on is that it will be, the final paper will be going to Cabinet in early September. And then, depending on Cabinet's view, it will be coming for a final decision for all members through Council, and I think it's at the end of September, 21st of September. That's the projected way forward. It rather depends upon what we find in the last few weeks, whether we can keep to that, but that is the intention so far, because a lot of effort has been put into it. We brought into this process some of the best officers in the council to take this forward because it was so important. And we've had some really good work from them, and I want to finally just thank them for the work that they have done.
Thanks you, Councillor Greenland. Okay, moving to the recommendation 2.1, that we scrutinise a full business case, and only one recommendation was put forward officially by Councillor Brown to make sure Audit Committee reviews the governance structure, which we're going to ensure happens, but I'm sure officers have got a good feel for other areas the councillors have concern over and will reflect that in the final report. Okay, so is everyone happy with recommendation 2.1? And we're going to move it. Yeah, move, seconded. Great. I think that's hopefully unanimous. Thank you, and that's it for today's meeting.